Hello, it's Brad Laurie, your BlockchainBrad, and today we are speaking about all things Illuvium, and we are doing that with one of the founders of this startup. His name is Kieran Warwick, and yes, you would know that surname because his brother Kane is well known in the blockchain domain for the work he's done with synthetics. But it's all about you, Kieran, today, so thank you for making time to speak about Illuvium.
No worries, Brad. Thanks for having me on. I'm very excited to be able to discuss with you all the things that we're building and the trajectory that we're on.
Absolutely, mate. And that accent, it's great to hear another Aussie in the blockchain space building. And I really am looking forward to learning about how you are building with your brother Aaron as well. Now, for all those wondering, in the name of transparency, it's important you know this is free. There is no compensation for this interview, and certainly I have not invested in Illuvium. You know, I might in the future though. Who knows what will happen? Let's see how this interview goes. Now, Kieran, it's all about Illuvium. NFTs are a really hot topic right now, but they have been existent for some time, and gaming is a whole nother story, a legit system and technology built in for long-term use case. Now, let's talk about, you in a nutshell. How would you describe Illuvium? What essentially is it about?
So Illuvium is a combination of two genres of game. So two very, very popular genres, but it's an open world RPG game, well, collection game. And as well, it's also an auto battler built in. And so essentially what the player does is they go into the world. We've got a free to play element built into it. We didn't want, a lot of the blockchain games and DeFi games that are out there now have a very high barrier to entry.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't want that, and so there's a free to play element that you can go into the world. You can start capturing Illuvials using Shards, which are something that you mine out of the planet's core. With those shards, you can go around into 7 different regions. So it's a massive world that we've built, and you can travel around these regions and you capture these Illuvials. They obviously range in rarity. They go from a tier 0, which is that free to play element that I was talking about, all the way up to a tier 5, which is one of our signature Illuvials that we've already leaked is
like a
rare.
super rare type one.
Like super rare.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, again, sort of playing on the Pokemon style of game, we've also added holos and dark holographics, which you capture that Ramfire. If you capture a holo Ramfire, it's seriously rare. If you capture a dark holo Ramfire, go to the bank with that.
Got it.
Yeah.
And mate, we've seen the idea of NFT collectibles come to fruition and come to the fore for some years now in the blockchain domain, all the way back to the likes of Engine, for example, with its gaming platform. And you mentioned something interesting in that, you're focused on a particular game structure, a game play. You've built out this world as well. And collectibles are the sort of the cornerstone value proposition for what you're building. But beyond that, I imagine you'll be building a gaming platform. So let's go back to the statement that you are a DeFi NFT collection and auto battler game built on Ethereum. So let's talk about what it means to firstly have this NFT agenda, whether or not you're planning on building beyond just the game into a gaming platform, and how you're going to sync that with Ethereum effectively over time.
Yep. So one of the biggest things that I feel like is a problem in the centralized games out there, the Fortnites and the World of Warcrafts and whatnot, is that you don't actually have custody and ownership of your assets. And so that's the brilliant thing that NFTs and the blockchain allows you to do is, if for whatever reason, if I go and spend $2,000 on skins in Fortnite and all of a sudden Fortnite decides to shut the doors for whatever reason, I'm out. I don't get those assets. I can't sell them somewhere. It literally dies with the game. And so that's probably the most exciting thing for us, especially that we're building a collection type game.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of our long-term strategy, it's not so much to build a gaming platform where we would have other titles that potentially could build on top of us. It's more tying into the metaverse of having extendable characters that can work in other DeFi games, or potentially have characters in games, you know, our fellow projects out there that are building, and allow them to utilize our game and potentially bring them in. And whether or not that's Illuvium itself, maybe that's an expansion in the future. But yeah, that's the ability to have this ecosystem where it's potentially all interchangeable is really, really exciting for us.
And it's also quite novel. I mean, we've come so far in the blockchain domain since the beginning, and now you're talking about cross-chain NFT interaction between different startups, and that's something that we're starting to see technologically is catching up with the idea. And obviously, with your relationship with the various DeFi startups, we've seen the emergence of some of these partners that you do have. No doubt you're already thinking about different NFT startups that could potentially do this in the future. You know, so that you can build and strengthen these core assets, these Illuvials even that you've built. Now, what about the number you have? Now, you, as I understand, the monsters or the characters and are called Illuvials. How many do you have in this sort of network that you built so far? And where are you positioned currently in your roadmap as you move towards your launch?
Yep. So Aaron might kill me, but we have I want 150. Which again, it plays into the Pokemon style. They launched with 150 Genesis characters. We've got a very, very, very aggressive launch date for what we're trying to build. And obviously our team that we've got around us of core contributors are capable of doing it. But I guess the moving target that we have with the Illuvials is we're no doubt going to be out launching with 100, but it's can we get to 150? Mm-hmm. And it's sort of irrelevant in some sense, because our expansion plans in terms of Illuvium, just solely Illuvium, is to have multiple character sets. So if we launch with 100, we would look to have, you know, another set out, and that might not be, you know, another 100. It might be a set of 50, but we're looking to do that every 3 to 6 months to really keep the addictiveness going. We don't want it to get stale, particularly in the auto battler game, in the arenas, mm-hmm. because we've drawn off a lot of inspiration from Teamfight Tactics, mm-hmm. and they don't necessarily introduce new characters. They just change the synergies that the characters actually have. And so it keeps it interesting. You know, you're playing the same game, but it's almost completely different. And everyone has to go back and learn and adopt different strategies just overnight, basically. Right. So we're going to take a similar strategy and keep things interesting, because the last thing that we want to do is, you know, launch a game, everyone loves it for 12 months, and then they go, nah, kind of bored.
Yeah, and you know what's great as well, Kieran, is that you do have those precedents. Not so much there are a few, obviously, with NFT collectible examples, but even in the mainstream, as you mentioned, and that's where you also want to target, as I understand, not just solely and wholly in the sort of examples we've seen in the DeFi realm, but you want to capture the market share from the sort of CeFi gamers. So they can make that transition seamlessly with their own, with self-custody built in. But what is interesting too is in doing so, obviously want to make sure that the quality of the interactions all the way up to the quality of the graphics. And I have had a look at some of those Illuvials, and they're engaging. You know, they actually do seem to infer the kind of quality that you do see in typical games. So have you got the right team of gaming skill sets you built into the, you know, those who are doing the coding, those who are building out the plan of those, you know, let's say 100 ballpark of Illuvials to be ready for your launch? Do you feel confident that you can actually bring to the fore something that is equally competitive to the mainstream?
100%. And look, we are very, very competitive. I grew up in a family of 4 boys, When I first started looking, people ask me, what got you into an NFT style game? And we've been gamers since we were, 3-4 years old, all of us. Kane got us into, we were always playing via LAN. I think we're even on dial-up when we're doing
right.
And as you would know, in Australia, the internet is
pretty average.
And so for us, we're super competitive. And I looked at this landscape of NFT games. And look, I'm not here to say that any other project or whatever is not up to scratch compared to centralized games. But in my opinion, when I was looking at it, I just felt like there were too many games that had sort of rushed into the DeFi craze. And I know that because I was thinking very similar to that when I was looking at it. Let's go with 2D characters because it's much faster to build out a character set in 2D.
Right.
But quickly, it took me 2, 3, 4 weeks of going into that direction. And I thought, this isn't going to accomplish the main goal here. And the main goal is to bring centralized gamers into the DeFi space. There's so many advantages of building on a game on DeFi for the actual player that we know that once they understand the parameters of play to earn and how it can benefit them, and the governance that we've built into our game where the player can decide ultimately the direction of the game, everything is there, except there's just not a Fortnite, there's not a World of Warcraft, there's not there's no one out there that's building there's a few that have popped up now, but the existing games that I was looking at, I was like, I'm not going to get a Logan Paul to be able to come and play these games. It's just not going to happen. They're true gamers, and not only that, you can pay them any amount of money in the world, but they've got this reputation where if they're advertising something that they wouldn't play themselves, then they're just not going to do it.
Yeah, and you make a good point. When we talk about things like collectibles, that's very different to gaming. I think people misunderstand that they perhaps bring them together. But what you're actually doing is utilizing the benefits NFTs as collectibles in the context of a game that actually is appealing for gamers across the world, not just those who are interested in blockchain or want to interact with an asset of some kind as an NFT. Now that's a big difference. And so you've got to be ultra competitive from the outset. And that's what's interesting, hearing you come from your background of four brothers, being competitive in the gaming sort of space as well, making sure that the expectation's high from the outset so that we can bridge the gap. We can technologically make this possible so the self-custody relates also to the asset being something that can be traded and interactive across different games. So that's going to be an exciting asset. But let's bring it back to you and Aaron for a second. Now, for those who are wondering, you're one of the key members of, you are one of the key founders of Illuvium, and you're also trying to make sure this is built out for the most part, and you're leading that narrative. But then you have Aaron, who's a key technologist of this startup as well. So do you want to just give Aaron a bit of a plug and explain his role in what he's doing as your brother, as Kane's brother also? I'm paying attention because if Kane's doing what he's doing in synthetics, I can only imagine what you two are getting together thinking about, and then he giving you advice from the big powers that be in the top of DeFi.
It's very interesting. So a lot of people, obviously in DeFi, Kane's massively influential. They understand he's a very smart guy. Aaron is, I say this, and Kane will probably not like this, but Aaron, in my opinion, is probably the smartest out of all of us. And, he's super, super, super logical. His background is in computer engineering, and, back when he was, I think he was maybe 8 or 9 years old, he was creating units for a game that we used to be addicted to called Total Annihilation. And so he was, and funnily enough, he was building those units to balance the game, which is kind of interesting because that's what an auto battler is all about. It's about balancing the characters. It's rock, paper, scissors. there can't be one overpowered character that can destroy everyone else because it ruins the balance. It's all about skill. And so his technological background, I guess, is a lot more vast than what mine is. And so putting us both together, it just made sense to me. You know, he loves gaming, I love gaming. He's got an engineering background. I've got more a sales and marketing and business background. And we really gel well together. And the only gap in his sort of arsenal, I guess, is in the blockchain and DeFi space. But because he is so smart, he's able to pick it up very, very quickly. He does tons and tons of research. He's already started learning how to do Solidity coding.
Wow.
And at a basic level, like, it's nothing crazy. Obviously, we've still got a team of Solidity devs, you know, 5 or 6 of them that work with us as full-time core contributors. But there would be a massive gap if it was just myself, in that I can't, you know, we need to be making sure that what we're building is fitting. And, you know, things like, I understand from a top level the tokenomics and the psychology behind how tokenomics make an investor want to get involved with the project, but the underlying technology of it, that's where there's a little bit of a knowledge gap, and Aaron can really bridge that gap.
Got it. And I'm definitely looking forward to speaking with Aaron about that in detail when he does come on. And it seems like a perfect match. You know, not only are you brothers, and you do have Kane's in sort of position to leverage as well. You know, you mentioned something interesting about perhaps neither of you initially had a lot of blockchain contacts, perhaps, or a lot of understanding initially about the blockchain technology that does afford so much of the DeFi scenario that plays out. But then you have someone like Kane as a brother who's been doing this for some years. He's certainly got the contacts to help you as well. And he can also facilitate with Aaron with some of his own technology. And then your experience with the marketing business. That's important because they all relate to a successful outcome for something like Illuvium. So it's great to know, I think, for anyone who's considering this in the future, whether it be from a speculative mindset, whether it be from a gamer mindset, whether it be for an investor, that you do have the right combination for 2 parties, that's you and Aaron, to lead this out for your team. And obviously that team will grow, but it's important, I think, that we've touched on that. Now let's go back to Ethereum for a second. Now this is a tough one because scaling is an issue no matter where we go in the blockchain space, whether we go across to any of the main layer ones. Ethereum has its own challenges right now, and layer 2 is the imperative for something like what you're building. So let's touch on that with regard to how you're going to address or some of these key challenges for making this a seamless experience for gamers.
Yep. So that was the biggest issue by far and large before anything. You know, we looked at this and we started spitballing what type of game do we want to, you know, build and how's it all going to work. And every single time we would come up with something, we would be limited by, you know, Aaron sort of saying, if there's there's going to be a transaction in our game, for example, if you travel, there's going to be a transaction fee. If you are curing your shards, there's a transaction fee. If you're selling something on the marketplace, there's a transaction fee. And all of these things that are inside a game, again, if you pitch that to a centralized gamer and say, every 10 seconds, MetaMask is going to pop up and it's going to ask you $20, it really starts dragging away from what they're really used to. And so we needed to launch on a layer 2 solution. And that's where you're right. Going back to Kane, he actually, their layer 2 solution that they've gone with is Optimism. We looked at a number of different solutions. We ended up going with Immutable, which essentially allows us to have sub-second transaction feeds. There's no minting costs for exchange. And so for us, it's just a seamless gameplay. You're not even going to notice it in the background. It's something that, Immutable take a fee from us, and that isn't passed on to, it's just inbuilt into the game. So from a gamer's standpoint, they're looking at it and they're just playing like they normally would any game outside of the blockchain.
And it's interesting because a lot of people wouldn't know about Immutable X, as it's known, as I understand, as that layer 2 solution. I definitely want to talk to Aaron more about that, because I want to find out more about the position they're in. How advanced are they as a team for that leading layer 2 solution, and will they be ready when you're ready? So do you want to touch on any of that? I guess not diving deep, but give us a bit more of the meat of in this sandwich with regard to layer 2. How can we be sure that this synergy is going to be really strong from the get-go? And are there any other startups, like for example Starkware, or any others that are related to some of these technologies that are advancing Ethereum and also enabling you?
Yeah, so they actually use Starkware. So it's a ZK rollup, and the best part about Immutable and I mean, not the best part, but one of the most convenient things for us is that they're in the same city as Aaron and I. So they're based out of Sydney. A lot of people ask us this question: what if they don't launch? And right now they haven't launched, and they pushed back their Q1 launch to, I think, very early Q2 is now what we're looking at. But I guess the biggest thing that makes us feel confident that they will be able to deliver is that they started with their own gaming title, Gods Unchained. And Gods Unchained was hugely successful. They sold, millions and millions of dollars. They've raised a lot of money. There's huge community. A lot of people love it. And when we went and saw them, we said, look, these are the pain points that we see that could pop up over time if we're just on a layer 1, if we're just on mainnet Ethereum. And they had a lot of those solutions, and they said, look, it's literally, you're building a very similar style of game to us, and we had the exact same problems. And Immutable X is built to solve literally all of those problems.
I see. And what's interesting too as well, Kieran, sorry to interrupt, but it makes sense that you might want to choose them. And it's interesting you mentioned optimism, with all of the, I guess, literal optimism of many of the DeFi parties have in optimism to actually, bridge the gap when it comes to scalability. But the fact that they've had to address a problem in their own right with Gods Unchained, I think that's really interesting, because they literally were focusing on a game in their own right, needed to fix this problem of scalability. And I guess now the question is whether or not it's going to emerge at the same time when you're ready to launch your initial start as well.
Yeah, so we're looking. We're not too worried about it not launching. We're very confident that it's going to launch, in the next couple of months, and we're still 6 months away from our launch, or maybe a little bit sooner if we can really scale up our team. But yeah, given the conversations that we've had, we're very confident that they're going to be able to deliver. They also have huge reputational costs if this doesn't happen, it's not going to be good. And so
it's a make or break. And let the Immutable X guys know. I'd love to interview them to learn more, because that's a key part of your secret sauce, clearly, because that scalability is going to be really something that makes it seamless for me as a gamer, if I was to really enjoy the experience with the battles and with the Illuvials that you're building. So let's talk about, mate, the next thing, and that's the key features. If you could choose, let's say 3 or 4 that really stand out, that really isolate the value of the overall picture of Illuvium, what would they be for someone who doesn't know anything about what you're building?
So the first thing is that we dive deep into the psychology of collecting. And so part of that is the artwork. And we've taken our inspiration from extinct animals, or mainly extinct animals. And then we've taken that, and instead of going with procedural art or, super low quality 2D art, which by all means, a lot of people out there love that kind of stuff. They absolutely do. Pixel art, it goes crazy. I've bought into many pixel art games. I've bought into games like Axie and whatever. But for us, for the longevity of the game and to really, really get that person attached to that character, the biggest thing is the artwork. And so we have a minimum of 10 artists that touch every single alluvial before we consider it production ready.
Okay.
It doesn't stop there either. It's then the biology of that character and, you know, its story of how it got to where it is, its you know, its abilities, its synergies, its class. All of this is written into the backstory of every single alluvial. And so it creates an attachment. And I grew up in the 90s. And so Pokemon for me was literally life.
Right.
And, you know, and there's a story behind it because, you know, there's, you know, the Snorlaxes of the world and whatever. And you can tell I really like that one because it's fat and lazy and that's cute. And so we just wanted to make sure that every alluvial has the potential to create a connection with the audience. And so that's probably the first thing. The second thing is having substance in the storyline. If you look at all the AAA titles out there, there's always a storyline. And the first thing that I said to Aaron, who's a fantastic writer, who's crazy with ideas, and you know, we all have a few crazy ideas and we all help to construct what it is, but really he was the main story writer. I said to him, if we can't turn this into a motion picture, then rip it up and start again, literally. Right. And so we can't reveal that storyline because the way that the game is built, it's uncovered as you go along. And again, I'm really trying to be careful.
And that's okay because, you know, that's part of the mystery. That's part of the fun. As a gamer, everyone wants to ascend into the next level. You know, they want to have that mystery. So I totally respect that. And it's great to hear that from these first 2 points you're mentioning, the narrative is paramount. You know, you can have the best tech in the world for sure, but if you don't hit the mark when it comes to a really captivating story with the right kind of characters that have that very, very robust sort of background and backstory, then you may not be hitting the mark because everyone's going to be expecting that. So I see this as narrative pragmatism. You know, you're looking at the examples that exist in the real world and you're saying we have to at least hit this standard.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And the third one would be the tokenomics. So I invested in probably 60, 70 maybe. I looked at my trading wallet the other day.
That's a lot though, Kieran. I mean, wow. Really? 60 or 70. That's ambitious.
And I mean, I was talking to you prior to going live and saying it was only a 6-month period that I was doing that. So you can imagine how frantic it was. But what it allowed me to do is really get an understanding, again, going back into the psychology of things, of what makes someone invest. And I think the way that we've set up our tokenomics really plays into the story of giving it back to the people. We're completely decentralized. We have, you know, already we've set up a governing body that basically steers the protocol in the direction that we want to go. And but diving into that psychology was the revenues that we gained, right? We had, you know, and Aaron not coming from a blockchain or even, you know, DeFi, not knowing anything about it, he was like, what do you mean we're going to give the revenues to everyone else? And I'm like, this is the way it works, you know, this is decentralization.
Exactly. And that's where the biz brain that you bring to the table really matters, because we know without the right kind of effective tokenomics, it can actually kill a project right from the outset, because you're not obviously giving back to the right agents or the right parties. In this case, the public really do matter for engagement. So did you engage other advisors, you know, as you went through this tokenomic design? And can you walk us through a bit of that tokenomic structure as well? Because I think a lot of us don't know that. I'm not sure how public that information is and what you can disclose.
Yep. So 100%. And look, the two biggest people that had influence on our tokenomics was Santiago from Parify and obviously Kane. You know,
obviously, and they're both investors.
Yes, and they're both investors. So they wanted to make sure that they were very solid, very robust. They made sense. And it took a long, long time for us to be able to really nail it down. Part of that is because DeFi moves so quickly. And you're looking at like even we were very bullish on yield farming in the beginning. And
Yes.
we stayed that way because that was, that's the way that it was presented. But now I'm watching, 3-4 months on from like the DeFi summer, and yield farming is starting to sort of trail off, and people are looking at other ways and other mechanics and whatever. But for us, Kane's very pro yield farming.
Very. I mean, obviously with the synthetic aspect, and he would know also there's a transience with each particular part of the yield farming process, but they tend to kind of leapfrog into the next. That's been the traditional means of creating more and more yield. And you are lucky to have him, I think, with the knowledge he does have. But I think the long term is the agenda you have, regardless of the yield farming or that liquidity mining approach.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that you say that, right? Like I was one of those frogs who was jumping from lily pad to lily pad, so just new project, flipping them, and that's why we've introduced a new mechanic, which is the vault distributions, which is essentially all the things that we've spoken about, the travel fees, people buying skins, enhancements, exchange fees. None of that goes to a centralized vault, if you will. It goes to a decentralized vault. And what that vault does every single week is it purchases ILV back off the market. So it creates this buying pressure, which should, in theory, increase the token price every single week. So we get all of that. So the in-game currency is ETH. We wanted to make it super easy, and so all of that ETH that people spend each week goes into this vault. We purchase it off the market, either sushi or uni, and then we redistribute 100% of those profit of those revenue of that revenue to stakeholders. And so
that's a big deal.
Yeah, it creates this thing where you're looking at it and you're like, okay, even if our token 10x, right, from where our BLP is, which is on Tuesday.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that too. And it wouldn't be surprising if it does, considering the way the market's been with everything that references NFT. But it is interesting you talk about with the staking, though, Kieran, because that's when the retention of value happens.
100%, yeah. And so the question is, how do you get someone to stay staked in the protocol, right? That's you need the liquidity to stay there. It's a big indicator of how well a project is going. And if you've got this massive pump where in the first 3 months your yield is essentially completely distributed, you're going to get this massive rise where every single person in DeFi jumps in, and then every single person bar the poor people at the end who get left holding the bag. And so we didn't want that. And
we've seen that, we won't name one, out of full respect for the person, who led that out, it is what has become a very well-known liquidity mining asset, but it did move rapidly at the start. And so that presented a really important, I guess, opportunity to learn from, because if it's moving that fast in the beginning, how do you sustain it? It becomes a problem.
Yeah. And that's, again, we're not what we're looking to do. We're this hybrid of a gaming DAO and also a financial protocol as well. And so we've got to find that happy medium where how do you keep the investor happy? The guy who says, I might not play the game, but I want to understand that gamers will play the game, And so how do you keep those investors and those yield farmers staked? You have to give them profit share of the overarching revenues, right, that come in. And some games have done that in DeFi. I think obviously I don't know all the games, but out of the big ones that we've looked at, the most is about a 20 to 25% revenue distribution.
Yeah, and yours is 100. Bloody hell.
And look, I set it at 100. That was what I did. I am now effectively no one in apart from being a core contributor, a co-founder. all I can do now is say that that's what I believe to be the right number. If for whatever reason someone puts in a proposal to our council, they can change that overnight from 100 down to 80. And if they have the right rationale and it makes sense, the council members are literally delegates that were voted in by our entire community.
Yes, and that's what's interesting, and that's what's dynamic about the space is that boardroom, that multi-sig or that governance, board, that can change over time too, and that can increase in number. I mean, that's what's great about the plasticity of the design as well. It's very flexible, and as you mentioned, there is 100% right now, but that fact alone can change. There's all that mutability and potential built in, but it's exciting to hear the 100% number for now, though, Kieran.
Yeah, I don't foresee it change. It would be weird. It would be a situation where if we for whatever reason said that the Treasury is going to get 80% of the funds and 20% is going to go back to the people, and we still launched as the same decentralized game that we are, I guarantee you within the first week, someone will be putting through an IIP saying, this is bullshit. We're going up to 100%. So do I see it going lower? Unless it's a very interesting use case, probably not.
Right? And it's interesting because the more generous the initial architects of this design are, coupled with the generosity potentially of the initial investors, that's where it can really accelerate attention, because it means you're involving and you're in the everyday retailer, allowing them more access through the staking process, as opposed to trying to enrich the bags of few in the beginning. And that's where a lot of them stuff up, I think, in crypto design when they get it wrong, is they just make the few rich in the beginning and don't give enough of the piece of the pie out. So you're flipping that on its head.
100%. Yeah. And we, it's a pretty daunting. I've started 4 or 5 different businesses in my, I guess you'd call it, somewhat short career, but never in a million years in a centralized game would you ever give away more than, like 50% equity. In this, I've got, when you really, really look at it, so like I had people be like, are you crazy? You're going to do all of that work and you only have a very small percentage of what you've effectively built. But I believe in decentralization. I believe that had we gone out with a more aggressive tokenomics strategy that was more built around having the game earn the revenue distributions and not so much the players, I think it would be 50 times less effective and as valuable. And so I look at it and it's like the answer, like, do you want 1% of something that's $1 million, or do you want, a fraction of a percent that's worth something $1 billion?
And let's be real about this too, Kieran. If you're offering this kind of high percentage of rewards, staking rewards for those parties, 100% in this case, surely it's fair to suggest or infer that upon launch and beyond that you're going to move fast, even if you want to or not, because it's going to attract a lot of people into that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, this has just been rapid. Like I've never worked so many hours, like even even before starting the project, it's been rapid. The learning curve that I've had to go through has been very, very fast. Same thing with Aaron. And our plan is, after this BLP, we're going to take the proceeds of that. And again, it's not right off into the sunset. It's like, okay, if we're going to build a AAA quality game, we need to go hard. We need to go from our 45 core contributors now to 100. And if it's not 100, we need to go to 150.
Exactly.
If you really want to compete with the Riots of the world and the Ubisoft and all these other massive centralized players, you have to go harder. And that's where I talk about the competitiveness in me. I don't want to compete with DeFi games. I honestly don't. I mean, I think we've drawn a lot of learnings from the DeFi games that are out there. And so in one aspect, I want to be a lot like, from a financial standpoint, a lot like the DeFi games that are out there. But if I peg myself to, or if we peg ourselves to what's here now, then it's
I
only
see
a
what
matter,
you're saying.
it's only a matter of time before they come in, and then I'm sitting there competing with
Yeah.
you know. And so it's not to talk badly about the space at all. Like I think it's there's so many games that have pioneered in this space, but I want to look at it from 5 years from now, not 6 months. And 5 years from now, this, you know, if what I believe comes true and players out there start demanding from these massive studios, we want custody of our assets. They're going to start, you know, I'm already hearing rumors around that big studios are coming into this space and they're not bringing 10 people teams, you know, they're 10-person teams. They're bringing an army.
And you know why also. It's because the scalability is now, you know, in sync with the potential of NFT for the first time this year in 2021. Now, what's exciting also is that from what you're saying, what I'm hearing from you, Kieran, is that you want to capture the attention of gamers the world over, and that includes all of those in, you know, traditional markets and those traditional gamers. Now, to do that, you need to make the blockchain relatively invisible, and that's where I hear your conversation going. Is that the mechanics is really crucial, but are relevant to the gamer. What they want to make sure is the experience is seamless. So capitalizing on blockchain technology in the context of the best possible game, and hence that narrative pragmatism comes into play and really synergizing that effectively. So it makes a lot of sense, mate. And that's part of the secret sauce that you're going to potentially have to lead this out successfully. Now, going back to those investors, no doubt they see the vision, the intention, they've invested and put their money into this. Have they locked up long-term with you to build this out so that we know this is a long-term project?
Yeah, so 100%. We tried to get investors. We were lucky in that having Kane's influence. As soon as we launched, I think we had a...
That's massive, by the way. I mean, the access that he has to DeFi is insane.
Like one day I'll get out of his shadow, but usually you're in your father's shadow. In this case, I'm in my brother's shadow, so it's a little bit weird. But he gave us an unparalleled ability to get in contact and start these conversations with big investors. And when, you know, I can definitely see investors that we spoke to looking at projects that maybe they don't have the same, you know, surname that we did, and looking at a little bit more skeptically. But with us, we were able to come in and say, yeah, we have a really aggressive 2-year locking mechanism on your tokens. It's a little bit different in that we're still allowing them to LP, and we don't think that all of them are going to LP. We think it's going to be, you know, maybe 20% of them will, but that's going to help out the liquidity of the protocol. It's going to make, you know, the TVL, everything is going to be bigger because of that. And a lot of investors dropped out, you know, a lot that came to us originally and said, yep, we're all in, you know, we want to give you $1 million. And then you say, okay, but by the way, 2 years, how do you like that? And it's to clearly define it, it's a 1 year lockup, and then it's a 1 year linear unlocking. So effectively it's a 2 year lockup. They would be able to sell their last token on, you know,
the last day of the second year. And, you know, that's quite generous in the scheme of, I guess, the higher grades of investor lockups. And we're talking about the grading of reputation when they're evidencing that with the kind of resources they provide, not just the capital, by the way, but the people you're talking about, like Parify. Many of them are known for doing a lot more than just putting their money into a project. And I think that's what's interesting about what you said. I think more people need to know this from the experience of founders, is that as soon as you do infer, you know, something like a 2 year lockup, a lot of the other ones just piss off, and you want them to, because if they want to leave, let them, you know, move to those shorter shills and those potentially sometimes those shit coins. But it does require trust with the lockup so that you can have that period of time when you build this through. So congratulations on securing some of those bigger names. But the thing I wanted to ask you, and this would be a tough question, but as an Aussie, you'll handle it. Do you think you would have got it without Kane's help? Would you have secured some of those big names without Kane, do you think?
Short answer is yes. Long answer is that it would have taken a little bit more time.
Yeah.
So one thing that I absolutely love doing, and this I learned in traditional markets, is capital raising is unbelievably fun. For the, I'm a business person at heart, but real deep down, I love the psychology of selling. And so obviously having Kane's name made it 10 times easier. Would we have been able to say no to some of those people that, would we have been able to employ the same lockup period? Maybe not. Would we have had to have changed a few things around? Probably. Would it have taken 2 months instead of 2 weeks? Probably. But yeah, do I back myself that I would have been able to raise the money? Obviously, there are a number of other projects out there. We really, like, Kane's influence is one thing, but when you sit down and you look at our pitch deck and you go, okay, they've thought about pretty much everything, which again, maybe that's because Kane's influence and his advisorship, we got to that stage, I don't know, but the project itself, I think would have garnered investment. To
be honest with you, these B and A grade investors, they don't muck around as well. You know that, Kieran. It doesn't matter how great the relationship is with Kane. At the end of the day, it's their capital and they're going to do their own due diligence. And you would know from the experience as one of the co-founders, it takes time with these guys. They ask you every hard question under the sun. They interview you. So what was the experience like coming through and now being successful with your raise?
That was probably the hardest 3 weeks of my life. I'm not even like it not because the conversations were hard, because when you're the amount I'm very, very transparent. I find it very hard to be able to sit there and go, an elevator pitch. I have so much conviction where I'm trying to explain to them, we really, really believe in this. And so we were having conversations that, the VC might say, you see 30 minutes, and I'm thinking, shit, my BD, who helped me out through the race, he's like, that's not even enough time for you to get your point across.
Yeah.
And so I think we had 47 meetings in the space of 3 weeks, not including follow-ups. And obviously 70% wanted to follow up, and all of this literally closed in a 3-week period. So, and again, as you know, we're in Australia, so a VC doesn't want to talk to you at 2 a.m. their time. You're talking to them at 2 a.m. your time. So you're just sitting there going, what the fuck? And
it's so true. And, as an advisor to 2 projects and also just knowing the space, congratulations on surviving that many calls, because some of them, as you've learned, not all of them are there for the long term. So half of those probably left and wasted your time. But for those who took the time to do the due diligence, and then for you to be up at 2 a.m. for them, you've done very well to get through that, but it was an important process because it separates the men from the boys in terms of true investors in you. And the other thing to remember too is that in the beginning, many of these, and we spoke of this pre-interview, many of these bets are based on pre-utility. Now, in your case, you have got the code there already initiated with Aaron and his team. That's important, but you still do have a pre-utility scenario with the many different facets of your token design. You have the payment, the DAO ownership, the passive income, you have the voting structure, all these different facets that make it a true legal utility. But, we would need to see that actualized when you launch, and there's that time gap. And so these guys have found a value in you beyond Kane, beyond, just the simple potential of, you pitching the best you can as that Aussie with the proper chip on our shoulders we have. But beyond that is you have something real. They wouldn't have invested their money if they didn't see it.
Yeah. No, that's what I always go back to, I think regardless of Kane and regardless of me pitching it or whatever, I think there would have been a lot of people out there that said, yeah, I see this. And you got to remember, this is pre the NFT craze that we were doing this. So it took these investors that really took the leap. And that's why when people say, oh, they got such a good price compared to what we're potentially launching at. And we're using a balancer liquidity bootstrap pool, which by far and large, we think is the most fair way to distribute the tokens. But we don't know what price it's going to end up at. I put in a proposal, which actually got counted, funnily enough, by Delphi Digital today. And so there's a revote, but I put in a proposal to go at $100 token price.
I did see that, and I saw some of the reactions very quickly to that.
Yeah, there are a lot of people like, whoa, that's too high. But it's designed to be balanced and literally say in their documentation, whatever you think the price is. And again, with Kane's help, we got access to Balancer, the guys behind it. And so they were a big help in saying, yep, the parameters of your sale make sense. They align with where you think it's going to end up. But my point there is that these guys who made that leap of faith to invest in us 3 months ago now, or even 4 months nearly, they were taking on the most amount of risk. They didn't know what was going to happen with us. They didn't know that we were going to grow our Discord to nearly 20,000 people in 3 months.
It's been insane. I mean, I would have guessed it based on a few things, but I too also didn't realize how quickly the NFT hype would run, knowing that NFTs have been around for so long. So it's been a very fortuitous scenario that's played out. But I do think that you had some other things going for you that were all going to align, particularly with Kane, with the balancer involvement and the type of investors you had. Many of them were all in that DeFi sphere, and many of them sort of really supporting in that higher grade of, I guess, investment.
I mean, when you got guys like Anton, who's invested
from 1inch, you mean?
From 1inch, and he's coming to you and he's saying, "Hey, let me review your contracts." Like that is you can't put a value on them.
Yeah, you really can't.
And so we have that across the board with these investors. But again, it's just because of, we're brothers with Kane and whatever, at that stage, NFTs weren't going off. There wasn't any big, I think Axie hadn't even done their Binance launch and whatever. And I think Decentraland was the highest value game, but it was like 150 million market cap. You look now, it's
insane.
2 billion.
The pace has just been extraordinary. If you look at Ecomi, for example, I mean, I'm not personally invested, but I mean, it was such an anomalous rise, the way it just peaked so rapidly. And that was just one small example of the NFT craze and the hype that's been building. But beyond the hype is where we want to see things sustain themselves. So that's what really matters. And it's just, great that the narrative is there now. What a great opportunity with the balancer launch. So we're going to talk about that. But let's go back a bit, though, to the in-game sort of value of the token. Now, you have Ethereum as one avenue for essentially payment options, but you also have the SILV. And this is where Kane really does matter. So do you want to touch on that? Because he definitely advised you, I would imagine, on having the synthetic aspect of it.
Yeah, so that came from the way that the tokenomics is set up is you can stake and you can choose to you don't have to lock yourself up in a pool, but you have the option to. If you and it's up to 12 months, and it's a very simple mechanic. If you are staking and locking up for 12 months, then you've got double the weighting in your pool, and double the weighting gives you obviously additional yield. But that's regardless of how much you lock up your tokens for, your yield that you earn is locked for another 12 months.
Okay.
Now, this is where I always go back to, we've got gamers and we have investors. Now, an investor that's looking at it like myself, if I put my investor hat on and I go, okay, do I care about my yield being locked up for a 12-month period? No, because I've looked at the fundamentals of the token. I've looked at, team, everything. It all makes sense. 12 months, totally fine, right? Yep. And it's yield anyway. It's a bonus, right?
It's a bet on the belief of the longevity of the startup, essentially.
Correct. But you then got to try and tell a gamer that, and you run into problems. They're thinking, I've got yield. Why can't I use that yield in game? And so that's where we had to come up with the ability for the gamers who are staking the protocol that that might not be staking $1 million. They might be staking $1,000, and they're looking at it and they're going, well, I would love to buy this new skin in the game, and they can't do it because their token's locked up.
Right.
So that's when we decided to come up with this synthetic ILV, which essentially means that you're foregoing your ILV rewards if you choose to take it in SILV, but then you can immediately go and buy that ram fire on the exchange if you've been waiting 12 months or 6 months to actually access your rewards. Instead of that, you can literally go.
That's super cool, because that means that a lot of the gamers are going to, have that redeemability, and they're going to bypass definitely that incentive, because they're not all going to be thinking as an investor for sure. But the other thing too, I wanted to ask you in this instance, Kieran, is as you move towards launch, and that's projected to be about Q3, I think, from the literature. Yeah. Now, in that sense, how do you get most of these gamers to be thinking, in the context of any kind of investment, or even in this scenario? Because until they can play and interact at that level, you would think most of this is going to be an investor game for the most part, because a lot of people will be thinking about staking, especially with the rewards you've built in.
Yeah. So it is a tricky one. Obviously, we needed to get something out there as soon as possible, and the way to bridge that gap was to start the yield farming early, and not do it while the game starts. But to get the gamers over and understanding the investment side of it is a very tricky process. It's obviously an educational one. It's being able to get them interested in the game, and what we see is the first place that they'll go is they might see a YouTube video, or they might see something on Twitter, and they'll usually jump into our Discord. From our Discord, that we see it all the time. They literally go, "Hey, I just saw those graphics, or I saw that trailer and it was insane. But what is this? Like, how do I actually play the game?" And our community comes in. They say, "You got to do this," and even to the point where they're like, "But I don't know what Ethereum is," and it's like, you watch these people, they step them through.
That's awesome. So this is part of the process of mass adoption.
100%. And again, you need that anchor to get them to come across. You need something like that trailer that we put out, which it's a cinematic, but it's in game, and people get that kind of, fuck, what is this? I want to play it. And they jump in, they get educated on it, and you watch someone go from literally, even our core contributors, you got to understand that we pulled these guys from studios. They didn't know anything about the blockchain.
And you know what's great too, though, as well, Kieran, is that none of these guys, these degen and very or otherwise very skilled developers, regardless of what camp they're in, they all love money. At the end of the day too. So if they understand that coupled with potential of gaming is the potential for staking and thus rewards, that's a bonus, for them. And it's a new experience for them that they've never seen potentially before in the context of gaming. Because as you mentioned quite rightly, and I've experienced this with my own children, is that one of the big problems with custody and the big problems with centralized controls is the asset is never owned by that party. My kids end up, forgetting about a game they played, and all the money's gone that we paid into that. So this is a big game changer literally for them, when it comes to engaging in something that's never been afforded to them technologically, built in.
Yep. And this is the strong belief that we have, is once they get educated, and look, they're people of the internet. Gamers are online. They're constantly researching. They're always looking for the next best thing. And so without us, it's still going to happen, right? It's definitely still going to happen. There's going to be big games. All it's going to take is a single big title that comes out. And sorry, when I say big title, a single big studio, right? That a lot of people have followed. They've got hundreds of millions of gamers already playing their game. It's when they come out and they go, "Hey, this is new age. This is where gaming is going. And we need to accept that, we're not as a centralized entity. Maybe they don't go out with 100% distributions. Maybe they dip their toe in the water and they do 10% distributions." Giving someone 10% distributions of Fortnite all of a sudden, if you're playing that game,
it's massive.
It's fucking huge.
It's massive, and that's why you need to be higher right now, so you garner a lot of the attention first. And I can see the logic of that. So congratulations for capitalizing, because, you know, as you said, a lot of these centralized gaming parties, companies and the like are paying attention, especially this year. Less so last year, even less the year before, but they're coming in like a big tsunami, really. So you've got, you know, some of those first mover ads, you know, still built in, you know, when we think about the potential of this for years and decades beyond. But I want to pull it back again for a second to those initial investors. Now, Frameworks is an interesting one as a lead investor because they tend to be long-term. They back the likes, for example, of YFI. That's been well known publicly. Chainlink is another. They are well versed in the top tiers of investment in the US. Yes, exactly. Of course, I should say in synthetics, very much backed. So, but irrespective again of Kane, I'm going to ignore him for a moment in this conversation. Now, they tend to really stand up and say, hey, we are long-term. They'll back their brand and state it publicly. Now, when you've got that kind of confidence, and then you've got others like Delphi Digital, and some others I don't know, but also another one, IOSG, they all tend to sort of work in the same context. Now, in that respect, do you feel like they're going to be there for you and offer you resources all along the way beyond capital? And if they do, what kind of things do they do? Teach us a bit more about what kinds of things these A and B grades do when it comes to offering you the support you need to really make this a long-term success.
So something like a Framework, they've already indicated to us that they're going to be LPing, and to be able to LP if at the levels that were what is looking like our token is going to launch at, you need a lot of liquidity. Not many players out there, even the VCs, not many people will take and it's a big risk. There's impermanent.
Massive.
And actually said to us, you know, if you let us in, because it's a funny story about Framework. Basically, they're huge investors in synthetics. And Kane thought he gave me that introduction, but he didn't. And, and it was right at the end, like at the 47th phone call that we had was Framework. And they were just as pissed at Kane as I was, because I'm sitting there going, what the fuck's wrong with you? Like, why wouldn't you introduce us to them? And when we got on the phone, they were like, firstly, weird, you look and sound very much
they would have wanted to know a lot more given the narrative, given the situation, and also they're very much pro DeFi, as you'd appreciate.
But yeah, so they were amazing, like, and it was a surprisingly easy conversation, and they literally just said straight away, we want to leave, you know. And what we bring to that table is you know, massive amount of contacts, particularly for us, like why it's advantageous for us is in the NFT space. And they're looking at doing some things with NFTs in the sporting world. And so, you know, they've got a ton of experience with that, and just purely their ability to provide liquidity to our protocol.
I think that's the big thing that a lot of them simply can't do. You know, they have a liquidity bank that is just really quite substantial.
Yeah, I mean, it could be $10-15 million that they need to do, and not many people have. Or not. It's not that they don't have that. It's that one thing to go put $1 million placement or $500,000 placement into a token, but then to go, okay, we need to, and it's, you know, with the added risk of impermanent loss and all of that kind of stuff, to lock up and 30 times more liquidity into a protocol, that's a big, bold risk. And you need to have a very, very sturdy VC to be able to really, like, for lack of a better term, have the balls to do that.
100%. And that's why I wanted to have this real conversation. I knew as Aussies we're going to. And in that respect, considering they went balls deep, you know, and they really showed their commitment doing this, it gives us a lot of confidence. I mean, I'm not an investor, you know that, but bloody hell, I'm thinking more about this as I move forward, listening to you in the future, because you know that they wouldn't go balls deep if they weren't long-term in this. And they've done this before. And their track record is one of the things I was paying attention to, not just them, but the other investors like Parafy, particularly those in that sort of that DeFi US sort of scenario I was looking at. But you also have investors that play a little bit of a different game too, where they're interacting in networks that you need as much as those parties, and it all comes together to really affect a very positive outcome for you, short-term and long-term. So, Kieran, let's talk about the thing I don't know a lot about, and that's the Balancer liquidity pool launch. Some have written about it as a launch pad in itself, with Balancer doing it. Can you teach us a bit more about what's happening at 1500 hours, March 30, UTC time? What the heck's going on? How is this all going to play out for these investors? Obviously, they're going to be really confident of this because of the launchpad scenarios this year have been insane. But these guys hopefully are not, they can't dump for a start with the lockup. But, what do you anticipate, knowing what you know, with the kind of initial launch?
Yep. So look, there were two options we could have taken. We could have gone your standard IDO, which is, hit a launch pad, which is go on Binance or even just Uniswap it, and you start it off at a really low price, and it just, with the amount of hype that we have, I don't even want to think about what it would do. And essentially what happens is, you look at one example of this is my neighbor Alice, very similar.
What was that, 400x or something?
It was fucked up.
It was crazy.
I think they started at 10 cents and it went to $60 in like a minute. I actually invested in it very, very quickly. I got in and I got out because I looked at it and I thought, like, even when I got in at a $2 billion valuation, and I thought about that and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, at what point?
That's a big valuation for many startups
without a product. But then I look at it and I think that's where we're at. And obviously, their community isn't as large as ours, but they've got huge backing in that it's the Immutable guys that are sorry, not the Immutable guy. It's a team that they're building, and they're actually building another game, which is why I'm getting mixed up.
Right. But I think also, from my understanding, is that companies like DAOmaker, different parties, many of them are getting involved in supporting things like Alice. I don't know the ins and outs, but certainly that initial launch through a launchpad scenario can be very lucrative for the early investors. But I wanted to understand more what you're doing and why you chose this other path.
Yeah. So because of all those reasons, we went with the Balancer style sale, which essentially is a Dutch auction, and so you started off very, very high, and the mechanics of the sale actually pushed the price down, right, in increments. And so if no one bought in the sale whatsoever, it would go from $100 down to essentially $4.20. And we didn't do that for a reason. It just so happened to be that. And so it allows for this fair price discovery where if for whatever reason, and $100 full disclosure is a fully diluted $1 billion valuation.
Okay.
Huge, right? Again, pre-launch, massive.
But you're aiming for the stars, literally, with your suggestion.
We're not suggesting that 100 is even the price. I don't know. I honestly don't know where it's at. There's so much shit involved in the background. There's with all the other influence and how big that.
But you've got to aim high with a Dutch auction design.
100%.
Okay. Right.
Because the whole idea is that you're trying to prevent bots front running, whales buying it all up, and because it's not just a one-way sale. You can obviously sell back into the Balancer pool, and so we didn't want this situation where we launch at, say, $1 and then it shoots up to $500 because people go crazy with FOMO.
Yeah, then you've got to sustain it, and that's not going to be easy to do. And what's interesting too is you see the likes of parachains emerging now. Literally recently had a Kala launch, and I only mention that because they have an unpermissioned candle auction style, but these are fairer by dynamic in design. And so when you go across to the discussions of the likeness of a Dutch auction, have you looked at some of the examples where there haven't been as favorable outcomes? For example, with Algorand doing really well now, but they struggled. When they did their Dutch auction launch, it didn't go to plan the way I think they intended. And it sort of went, it collapsed over time substantially for a very long time, a bit like the bear market itself. And perhaps that was part of it. So have you considered the risk inherent in just the Dutch auction model? Or are you confident that the design's right, with the way the Balancer put it together?
Yeah, we literally Balancer LVP's fairly new. You know, it's a fairly new way to distribute your initial tokens, and that's why, again, going back to Kane giving us that introduction to the Balancer guys, they worked with us on the parameters of this. They've watched, you know, obviously they look at every single LVP that happens. And now that we've seen 20 or 30 of these, you know, pan out and see the result, they've got a very, very good idea of the parameters that make sense. And, you know, we explained to them all of the hype that we have behind the token, everything like that, and what we ideally want, which is to prevent the front running of bots, to prevent whales being able to just jump in. And so we said to them, look, this is our justification for the pricing and the weight and all of that. And we had to make a few modifications to that to make it in line. And they gave us some really sound reasoning as to why. But at the end of the day, it was pretty close. And that's because Aaron is fantastic with math. He's that's one of his favorite things to learn about. And so for him, when we started running these simulations, we believe that we're going to prevent the bots at this price. But again, Delphi just put in a $50 price. I don't know what
but that's the exciting thing. This is why we love DeFi, you know, because we do see these submissions and proposals, but that's still relatively high. So I wouldn't worry too much whether 100 or 50.
Yeah, I think it should. I think it should still prevent those bots from front running, which is the main thing, right? The last thing that we want to do is have someone buying at a high price and then literally 12 hours later, they're sitting there and I'm 4x down.
Exactly. And you know what's great too is it is built in for auction. So it implies democracy as opposed to, you know, these problematic launches where things are all done sort of underhanded, where there might be a huge amount of supply built up in an exchange or built up with an entity to feed out sort of a very market-made scenario that sort of inflates price rapidly but doesn't have a lot of sort of value built into or substance built into the way in which it appreciates in price. So I guess it's going to be interesting to see how this builds out, you know, from March 30 onwards, especially considering, you know, you're so far relatively, or not really, but Q3 is still some time away for your actual launch. But, you know, with all the things you know, are you confident, like given all the different variables, that it will be a successful sort of launch, let's say a month from that point, you know, as you just refocus back in building?
So I've guzzled down my own Kool-Aid, obviously. I'm biased, you know, I'm one of the core contributors. Do I think it is? Yes. And I guess the guarantee that and why I can, not guarantee, but why I can stress to people that we're doing everything we can to hold whatever valuation that we get. We don't just want to hold it, we want to build it. Yeah. And the opportunity here, the biggest thing that I would say to people is that the DeFi space is huge. It's got a lot of money, but there's 3 billion gamers out there, right? And so our plan, as soon as this LBP is done, is to upscale the team, go full tilt on hiring the best contributors we can possibly get in the world. We've already demonstrated that we're capable of that, but just taking it to the next level. That's I guess the next phase after. And also our ability to build partnerships with people and inside DeFi, but then externally as well. And I'm talking about massive YouTube partnerships with some of the.
And do you know what I'm hearing? I'm just sorry to interrupt there, mate, but I think I'm hearing that you know more than you're telling me, Kieran. I think that you'd be preparing some of these names right now. We've seen the likes of, for example, Logan Paul, just in those conversations with Bondly, and that created a lot of hype with the Pokemon, you know, cards themselves. And this is going one step beyond that in the sense that you have your own game, you know, your own collectible NFTs and, you know, your own serious investors backing this. And then you've got, you know, the likes of something like Balancer to really give you a kickstart. Now, if we're talking about all of those different things, we've seen the performance of some of them already. Surely you're looking in that direction of integrating those kinds of mainstream partners. So what are you willing to tell me?
So I'll tell you that we're very, very far along in conversations with someone who has, let's call it 30 million followers across different platforms, mainly in YouTube and Twitch.
Yep.
And so we're having several conversations. There's one main person that I'm looking to bring on board. I won't name that person.
I didn't think you would, mate, but it's good to know that you're putting your marketing brain on, you're putting your biz brain on.
That's the thing where Aaron and the rest of the core contributors, they just go, leave that to you.
Okay.
And I, by talking about this and literally saying, I'm going to get one of these massive YouTubers, one of these, I also hate using the word influencer.
But they are.
But they are. And we've got things like, our characters in game, we can put a skin on them, and that can be a famous person that we potentially do a partnership with.
And they have an ego, a lot of them. They love seeing their little caricature, the little Illuvial, in their name.
You got the Conor McGregors of the world who
exactly.
He went into Call of Duty and he was a character in that for one of those. But
and often, as you'd know, there's incentives also often built in for programs. No doubt you'd be thinking that sense for these entities, for these parties that have significant influence, because at the end of the day, you want the reach, you want the mainstream outcome. You've got to do whatever you can to make that happen. So clearly you're going to leave this out in more weight than you're telling me today.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest question marks, and I don't get it. I really, really don't get it. Maybe it's just because I've been immersed in traditional markets for the past 2-3 years, but there's this DeFi bubble, and it's almost like people are projects are afraid to go out of it, and it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like, I'm going after the biggest and best influences in the world.
I can tell, mate, the way you talk in the interview, it's so Aussie, it's so direct, and it's so bold, and you're not taking no for an answer. I get it. But I think one of the things that happens, Kieran, is a lot of people, especially those in the US, not like us in Australia, they're afraid of regulation backlash and compliance backlash. So let's talk about that, because you're going to go hard. It's clear. You're not going to hold back with marketing, and congratulations, mate, for some of those big names you've got under your sleeve, and you're not going to reveal them yet. Give me a call when you do. But with compliance, mate, that's tough, because every jurisdiction's different. NFTs are copying a bit of a bad rap in some parts of the world at the moment, as you know. So how do you sort of navigate those challenging waters right now as you start to also literally launch on March 30?
Yeah, so we were very lucky in that we launched as a decentralized autonomous organization. And so we are well and truly owned and run by the people. As I said, and it's demonstrated literally today in that I put forth a proposal. I'm the guy who came up with this idea originally, and I'm the one who's saying, I reckon we should launch at $100 price point because of all these reasons. I laid out my rationale. I explained, all of the different reasons why. And an investor in us literally comes out with a counter proposal, and it's democracy. And
exactly.
I'm sitting there, I'm like, what the fuck? Like,
but that's the beautiful thing of a DAO. That's what you signed up for.
That's what I signed up for. So I'm not a CEO of this company, right? I'm not, and so when we're speaking to our lawyers and we obviously we have to, they're saying, you're in this. No one really knows how to define a DAO yet. This is specifically Australia, but there's been many cases. There's been an ongoing one with a project for 2 years where they've been trying to. I think it's somewhere in Europe, but they've been trying to get this project shut down, and they can't because it's a DAO. Like, what is a DAO? If it's literally made up of 18,000 token holders, and then you've got 20 people who are executing the wishes of the community.
Yeah, it's potentially the most decentralized board you can get. in that context. Let's be real about that. And that's what's challenging. The great and more distributed that ownership or that board is in the DAO, the more challenging it is for policy makers, and they're playing catch up now. But let's pull it back though to NFTs in the narrative we see today and some of those top-down reactions. And we're getting some from the top down, particularly in the US, and feedback suggesting that some are looking hard at the policy or potential of this. Are you concerned at all, when it comes to, for example, the US market in the future?
Always. I mean, look, there's rumors all the time, different jurisdictions, different countries putting regulations on crypto. We've seen it throughout the last 5 years, and I think it just comes from a standpoint of they don't know what it is, and that creates fear. That they're scared, and so they're like, we need to regulate this, and so obviously all the time. And when you see something like NFTs blow up in the way that they have, and Beeple is able to go and sell us,
it's insane, $70 million. Wow,
that puts NFTs right in the spotlight. And you've got Mark Cuban who's going out there, he's spruiking it. It's fucking scary, right? It's almost like you want to fly under the radar, but then
you're in the eye. You're in the eye now, and that's the exciting thing. As an Aussie, I'm really impressed because we need more, I think, Australian startups to really rep the space. And, obviously Kane did that from the beginning, but now you're in the eye of the challenge in the storm of NFTs. And like you said, when we hear the likes of Mark Cuban and many other big names, let's be honest, start to discuss NFTs so openly, the thing I also want to ask you about is one step beyond even the potential concerns. I think they're going to be transient anyway, but that is the IP protections, the copyrights, because the risk of appropriation and theft is real, or even just copyability, where people can say, look, you've got an Illuvial, I'll make it some other name and we'll just have the same thing, we'll take your code. Do you know about any of the events or the startups that are trying to alleviate or improve that situation to have the IP protections in place?
And then the simple answer is you can't. If there's pros and cons of a DAO, right? If you go with a DAO, then you can't have a whole bunch of lawyers that are sitting there, protecting your IP, saying that you own that alluvial and that drawing and that. You can't. It's simple. There's nothing that you can put in place. You need to accept that someone can fork your code. It's all open source, and you need to back your team to say, sure, you create an alluvial, it'll look the exact same, but no one's going to buy it because it doesn't have any work. And I guess in our game, they can't put the DAO owns the code, right? And obviously someone can go and fork that and God,
whatever.
If they do, enjoy the ride. You won't sleep for about 6 months straight. But if they do, then they don't have the ability then to bring those alluvials into our game. It's not like they can be copied to the point where they're usable in a functional standpoint where they can go and ruin our economy by just if you will.
And one thing you've taught me from pre-discussion or pre-interview and also now is that regardless of whether or not there is that sort of copy of code scenario that does play out in the space, it's the network effects of Ethereum. It's the network that you've built over this time, including the one that Kane has himself. All of these different partnerships that build in, they're protecting the integrity of your team, of your technology, and your idea. And so that all comes into play. But obviously, no doubt, the open source scenario has evidenced examples where the copied code of something has actually done better. So there's always a little bit of risk, I think, out there that could happen. But it's good to know that from the outset you're aware and you're doing everything you can to protect the integrity of your plan and of your own startup. Now, speaking of the code, how transparent is it currently? What's the state of the GitHub? Is it all completely open source at the moment, or is it all closed until you move forward in your launch?
It's closed until we do the audit, and that hasn't been. I guess it hasn't even been discussed really. I mean, this has been moving so fast. the plan is to obviously make it all open source, but we want to get to a point where the last thing that we want to do is put out code that someone forks and it's potentially got, the ability to get hacked or anything like that,
or exploited. We've seen many of those as well.
Somehow, that's the last thing that we want to do. So, part of it is just that we've got QuantStamp who are partnered with us. That was another one where Kane said, no chance you're going to be able to get an audit. And I said, all right, let's test me and see if I can get it.
I love the competitiveness between you and Kane, and I love the challenge. You're probably saying that knowing that you'll push even harder.
That's the silver lining there. I'm like, are you doing this to like, what's going on here? But anyway, whatever, it works. And so we will make it open. All of that, we're literally right in the middle of it now. So our ERC20 just got audited. Our yield farming contracts are we've just finished our internal testing, and so they'll go to QuantStamp sometime next week. And as soon as we get to that stage, that's when we will open up the GitHub. And
okay, well, it's good to know that you've got the auditor there, you've got the audits in place. Now, closed beta Q2, that's the plan. Launched Q3, currently at that stage, maybe earlier, depending on how you go. So exciting time for your roadmap. Anyone can go and read into that. It's all transparent. But the thing I wanted to also ask you about is the future of how you may engage with other L1s or even layer zeros. Now, we've talked about this pre-interview. I understand why you chose Ethereum. The network effects are there, the devs are there, the traction's there, the attention, the NFTs, everything. But the reality is, in time, in the future, I wanted to get across to the audience. Are you agnostically positioned for the long term? Are you flexible? Are you willing to, concede or experiment and tinker with the potentials of other chains if they so, support, what you want to do out of scalability in terms of capacity?
Without a doubt, and you have to be in this space. Like, you'd be insane and look, I'm what I guess what you would call an ETH maxi, but I don't really believe in it, because I can tell you this: if someone comes out with a more robust chain that has more builders, that has more community members, more hype around it, and it just makes sense for our protocol, we're making the switch. I can tell you that right now. We're definitely agnostic. And I just strong believers in that. Do I think, now this is another thing, do I think that's going to happen? Absolutely not. I think Ethereum has proven now that it's definitely the most scalable, the most robust. There's, the L2 solutions are going to fix a hell of a lot of the problems. You got ETH2 on the horizon. I strongly think that we will stay with Ethereum, but am I opposed to moving to a different chain if, for whatever reason, the pros are there and it makes sense for us? 100% I would.
Got it. So let me translate. Sounds like 90% maxi to me, Kieran. But I hear what you're saying though, mate. I mean, everything there, and empirical evidence shows why you've chosen Ethereum. But obviously, as I suggested in the pre-interview, is watch the EVM compatibility coming in 221, 222 and beyond, because things are going to change where there's more support for Ethereum, building more of that multi-chain dynamic that will light up the potential of all blockchains in that scenario, that are leading the way. And Ethereum's not going to go away. It's only going to get stronger because it will be supported potentially by other chains. So great to know you're agnostic. Great to know you love Ethereum. We suspected that, and I'm just like your brother in that sense. Now, what about things like risks? Are you concerned about anything at all, considering the exploits we've seen in the hacks? And I know you've got audits built in, or they're being done now, but are you concerned at all, about the potential of this, how it could impact you, given that things can go from such high places to low so rapidly in this in the blink of an eye? Yep.
So obviously, we're just about to take a whole bunch of the DAO's money and seed a pool on Balancer. That inherently comes with a lot of anxiety and what if we get exploited? What if we get hacked? Now the thing that I would say to I guess make people confident is that a lot of our we're building a game. At the heart of this, we're building a game, right? And so we're not building a financial protocol to compete with synthetics or Aave or whatever. So a lot of our contracts are just forks of already existing projects that are very, very robust. So is it a possibility? I'm never going to rule that out, right? It's impossible to rule that out. Have we gone through all of the checks and balances, and have we implemented code that has proven itself over the last 2-3 years across everything in terms of our ERC20, our yield farming contracts, forks as well, and so that isn't really, and there's a couple of novel things that we've done, like I talked about the lockup period and being able to double that and get yourself more yield. That comes with a little bit of tinkering with the code, but for the most part, they're true forks, and so we've mitigated the risks as much as possible, because that isn't where the core value lies in our protocol. It's the game, right? Yeah. We need to make sure that is as secure and robust as possible. So I'm not so worried about the contracts, but to say I'm not worried at all would be insane. Yeah.
Got it, mate. And best of luck for March 30 UTC at 1300 hours, I think it is. Now that's when the important time is for that balancer launch, essentially through the balancer liquidity pool. I think that's what it's called. That's going to be, the ultimate test to see how you begin, but it's just the beginning. The reality is all kinds of things are going to play out. There's going to be interesting proposals until that point. Democratic system built in with this Dutch style auction. But the marketing, going to be interesting. It's going to be great to see how this unfolds. I'm assuming I've been following along some of the PR that you assumably have engaged already. And that's already been, coming forward, naturally before balancer happens. But what about after that? I mean, have you invested in a marketing strategy, agencies? I mean, what are you doing there?
Yeah, I think it'll get to, I don't really believe in marketing agencies. I just, I'd rather, and I don't, not because some can't be effective. And we used one early on and they were really effective, but it gets to a point where you need to, there's only so much an agency can do, because they don't know your business. They don't know everything about it. And if you sit there and you spend the time getting an agency up to speed, by the time you've done that, you're sitting in a room for a month going, this is this, and this is how we do this, and this is the proposition here. It's like, do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes quite repetitive because you're saying the same things over and over, when in fact, sometimes the natural and organic approach could evidence what you're building in real time anyway. Because let's be real, at Q3, you're going to have a launch, but until then, you're going to be forging ahead, with leaps and bounds, making sure you're building out your code, making sure that you're building out your team, improving the game potential of this. And in that time frame, you're going to have staking built into the system. So you've systematized everything from the outset to be attractive. And that alone, especially considering the staking rewards you mentioned, that's a carrot potentially far greater than any other marketing system out there anyway.
Exactly. The biggest marketing machine that you can build in DeFi is a very, very generous yield farming program. And we're giving away 40% of our token as yield farm. There's 1 million of those, so 25% of that of those 4 million tokens is for in-game rewards, which we're calling in-game yield. So things like tournaments and like achievements. But to give away 3 million, to put that in perspective, there's only 1 million tokens that are being sold in our BLP. We're giving away 3 million, so 30% of the total yield, the total circulating supply is literally in yield farming.
So it's 300% more than your BLP, which is crazy.
Fucked up, right? And that's from Kane saying, dude, you need to trust me on this. If you build a really good yield farming program that makes sense, that's very generous, that has a lot to give, you're going to get people flocking into it. And I know, because I was one of those people.
Yes, and we've seen also, like we've talked about before, the likes of the past prove it. And the question will be sustaining this as well, Kieran. I mean, I really want that to happen for you so that you can keep building upon this, literally block by block.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
So, mate, one thing to also mention is PC, Mac, even mobile potential eventually, but certainly PC and Mac compatibility will happen, for those. And if we go back to the game to wrap this up at the end of the conversation, this is what's all about, is that the game itself is paramount. Everything else that we talked about today is leading to that moment when you have that seamless experience for gamers the world over, so that they can really start to engage the blockchain in a self-custody context in a fun way that is as good as any.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, so PC and Mac, we wanted to do mobile, but again, this aggressive Q3 launch for a AAA title is really, really aggressive. Like there's no other word for it. It's a very, very ambitious target. Do I think we can hit it? Absolutely. Could we hit it if we added mobile? No chance. Now, we're setting this game up. The assets that we're building are easily transferable to a mobile platform. When I say easy, I mean it's not like you're taking a game that hasn't been designed with low poly characters to be able to transition. We've built it in, but it's still an endeavor that's going to take another probably 6 months. And so for those out there that want to play on mobile, which I know there's millions of them out there, bear with us. It will be probably, I'd say, midway through next year.
And you know what, mate? For the investors who are locking up, that's music to their ears. They don't want you to bloody do everything straight away, do they? They want to have some things that they're going to look forward to while they're locked up. And Kieran, as someone in this space, that's well experienced as an investor, as someone experienced who understands the dynamic of crypto and blockchain, thank you very much, mate, for making time for this very detailed interview. For those listening, you have survived. Hopefully you've learned a great deal about Illuvium. It's important that fundamentally it's about being a very effective real game. That is the aim of the team. That's exactly why they're here, to make sure that they can compete in the arena of gamers the world over, regardless of whether it's DeFi or CeFi. But the secret sauce is how they're designed as a DeFi design with blockchain built in. So, mate, I wish you all the very best, not just because you're Aussie, but that's partly why, but also because you have the secret sauce built in with all the different things we talked about, unfolding as of March 30. Best of luck with the complexities that are coming in with the balancer launch. But really what's going to matter is how you move towards achieving mass adoption. That's all I care about. That's what everyone's looking towards, and that is real use cases for the real world. Don't give up, Kieran. You are one of the Warwick brothers, but you're also one of two that are leading this out. So congratulations to both you and Aaron for convincing so many in the investor world to take it on and give it a good crack, mate, and don't give up until you achieve that mass adoption.
Yeah, look, one thing I can say for certain is that Warwicks don't ever give up. So you can be rest assured that's not going to happen. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it. I'd love to, once we get past this sale and maybe when yield farming starts up, have another chat with you. As I said, it was a very, very entertaining conversation pre the interview. So I'd love to get your thoughts further on the entire ecosystem. But yeah. Really, really appreciate it. Awesome talk.
No worries, anytime, mate. And we can catch up for segmented talks and we'll talk about key aspects as you continue building. But I wish you all the best for you and Aaron and all the team. And mate, just kill it when it comes to bringing gaming to the fore.
Do our best.
Give it a go, mate.